Chapter 1. The dash across Franchetti summer of 1944 burned hot and bright with victory. On August 1st, General George S. Patton's Third United States Army roared to life, and from that moment the war in Western Europe changed forever. Patton tall, ramrod straight, face carved from granite, ivory-handled revolvers glinting at his belt drove his men like a man possessed. He believed speed was armor, and he was determined to prove it. Sherman tanks thundered along narrow French roads day and night, engines howling, tracks chewing up the pavement. Infantry rode on the decks or piled into trucks, helmets bobbing, rifles clutched tight. Dust clouds rose so thick they blotted out the sun. The Germans, reeling from the slaughter in the Falaise pocket where tens of thousands had been trapped and pulverized, fled eastward in utter disarray, abandoned panthers smoldering on roadsides, columns of gray-clad prisoners shuffling westward. Under guard, town after town erupted in frenzy as the Americans rolled through. Old men wept openly, women threw flowers and kisses. Children ran alongside the tanks waving homemade flags. Chartres, Orleans, Sens, names that had languished under occupation for bitter years, were free again in days. By late August, Patton's spearheads were 300 miles from Normandy, and still moving. Paris fell on August 25th amid wild celebration, liberated by a combination of Leclerc's Free French 2nd Armored Division and elements of the U.S. 4th Infantry Division. But Patton barely paused. His eyes were fixed farther east, across the broad plains of Lorraine, toward the Saar, toward the Rhine, the great natural moat guarding the German homeland. Then the tanks began to cough and sputter. Fuel gauges dropped to empty. The miracle of supply that had sustained the lightning advance could not keep pace. At the Supreme Headquarters in London, Dwight D. Eisenhower faced an agonizing choice. He decided to stake everything on Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery's daring plan. Operation Market Garden, a thrust through Holland to seize bridges and turn the northern end of the Siegfried Line. Almost every gallon of gasoline went north. Patton's Third Army ground to a halt along the western bank of the Moselle River, engines silent, crews staring. Across the water at the spires of an ancient city, Metz. The word alone carried the weight of centuries. Romans had fortified it first. In the 17th century, Vauban, Louis XIV's genius of siegecraft, had ringed it with star-shaped bastions and outworks that were masterpieces of their age. After the Franco-Prussian War of 1870–71, the Germans annexed Lorraine and turned Metz into a cornerstone of their western defenses, building a belt of massive modern forts, huge slabs of reinforced concrete armed with disappearing turrets, surrounded by deep ditches, barbed wire thick as hawthorn hedges, and linked by underground galleries. In 1940, the French had surrendered the city without firing a shot. Now, in 1944, Adolf Hitler had declared Metz a festing of fortress to be held to the last man. To the exhausted but eager G is peering through binoculars from the muddy West Bank. The ring of forts looked unbreakable, more than 40 of them squatted on the hills around the city like great prehistoric monsters, silent and menacing. Patton paced his command trailer, slapping a riding crop against his leg. "I'm not going around this damn place," he told his staff. "We're going straight through the son of a bitch." Chapter 2. The First Assaults. The bloodbath at Fort Driant. September turned cold and wet. Rain fell in sheets, turning the gentle hills of Lorraine into a gluey morass. Under Major General Walton Walker's the 20th Corps, the first probes began. The most dangerous strongpoint south of Metz was Fort Driant, a sprawling complex crowning a ridge that dominated every approach. Across the Moselle Valley, its heavy guns could sweep the river flats for miles. On September 27th, after days of air and artillery preparation, the attack went in. Elements of the 5th Infantry Division, reinforced by the fresh 11th Infantry Regiment of the 95th Division, advanced across open ground toward the fort. Private First Class Tommy Riley, 22 years old, born and raised on the tough streets of Brooklyn, trudged forward in the first wave. He had survived Normandy, the hedgerows, the breakout. He figured this would be more of the same, just some old French forts the Germans were squatting in. He was wrong. The preliminary bombardment had been thunderous. Hundreds of P-47 Thunderbolts dove again and again, releasing 1,000-pound bombs and tanks of napalm that blossomed into roaring orange fireballs. Across the hill, American 155mm long toms and 240mm howitzers hammered the position until the ground shook like an earthquake. When the barrage lifted, the Gs rose from their start lines and moved forward expecting shattered defenses. and stunned defenders. Instead, as they closed to within a few hundred yards, the fort came alive. Retractable turrets rose silently from their concrete wells and spat fire. Machine guns and steel casemates opened up in steady, murderous bursts. Mortar bombs began to fall in perfect patterns. Walking across the advancing lines, Riley's platoon hit the first belt of barbed wire. Engineers rushed forward with bangle or torpedoes. Long pipes, packed with explosives, shoved them under the wire and blew gaping holes. Men poured through, only to be met by a storm of fire from positions that the bombardment had barely scratched. The dry moat surrounding the main works was steep and wide. Men slid and stumbled down its sides into a perfect killing ground. Bodies began to pile up inside the fort. The German garrison elements of the 19th Volksgrenadier Division, reinforced by officer cadets from a nearby school, fought with fanatical determination. The underground tunnels allowed them to shift forces unseen, popping up in unexpected places to hurl grenades or spray automatic fire into the backs of attacking squads. American engineers and infantry managed to seize two of the outer concrete barracks on the fort's surface. They fought room by room in choking smoke, blasting doors with satchel charges, clearing corridors with grenades and bayonets. Flamethrower teams advanced under covering fire, sending jets of liquid fire into embrasures until screams echoed from within. But every gain was temporary. German counterattacks surged out of the tunnels again and again, driving the Americans back in hand-to-hand fighting that left the concrete floors slick with blood. By nightfall on the first day, the attackers held only a precarious toehold, and casualties were already heavy. The fighting dragged on for days. Rain continued to fall, turning the hillside into a slippery nightmare. Ammunition ran low. Wounded men lay in shell holes calling for medics who could not reach them. Under the relentless fire, on October 8th, after suffering more than 500 casualties in the 11th Infantry Regiment alone, Patton reluctantly ordered the assault suspended. Fort Driant remained in German hands, an ugly, costly failure. The first real Czech Third Army had suffered since landing in France, north of the city. Similar small-scale attacks met the same stubborn resistance. The Moselle was in flood, bridges destroyed, approaches mined and covered by fire. Metz refused to fall quickly. In London, Winston Churchill followed every report with intense interest. He had long admired Patton's audacious style. The American reminded him of the great captains of history, Marlborough, Wellington, even Cromwell. But the delay at Metz worried him deeply. In the underground map room at 10 Downing Street, surrounded by staff officers and glowing situation maps, he puffed thoughtfully on a cigar. If Patton cannot take Metz soon, he told his chiefs of staff, the Hun will have precious time to strengthen the Siegfried Line. We must not allow this fortress to delay us indefinitely. Chapter 3. The mud and the waiting October brought even heavier rain. The Lorraine campaign bogged down completely. Tanks sank to their turrets in mud that clutched like quicksand. Supply trucks slid off roads and had to be winched out by recovery vehicles. Men lived in waterlogged foxholes, feet perpetually wet, shivering through endless nights under dripping ponchos. Sergeant Elias Goldberg, a grizzled tank commander in the 4th Armored Division, wrote home in a letter that never complained but painted the picture clearly. We sit here day after day, staring up at those big gray forts on the hills. They look like something left over from the last war. But the Jerry's inside fight like the devil himself is behind them. Patton refused to accept stalemate. He brought in French officers who had served in the Maginot Line to lecture his troops on fortress warfare. The lesson from Driant was bitter but clear. Frontal assault against prepared concrete positions was suicide. Better to encircle, cut off supplies, isolate each fort, and reduce them one by one with overwhelming artillery and air power. Meanwhile, the Germans poured reinforcements into the sector. General Otto von Knobelsdorff's First Army received orders directly from Hitler to hold Metz at all costs. New units arrived, many of them scratch formations, convalescents from hospitals, the famous earache and stomach battalions, teenage boys from Hitler Youth, older men from reserve depots. They were poorly equipped and trained, but they dug in with desperate energy, determined to buy time for the great counter-offensive Hitler was secretly preparing in the Ardennes. Patton toured the front constantly, jeep splashing through mud, standing erect in the open turret to speak to his soaked, weary soldiers. To the men of the 90th Division he declared, "This city of Metz has never fallen to direct assault in 1500 years of recorded history. We are going to be the first." In private moments, alone with his diary, he admitted the truth. This damned place is a tougher nut than I expected. But by God we'll crack it. Churchill, kept informed of every delay, sent a pointed cable to Eisenhower. The early capture of Metz is vital to open the road into the Saar. Urge Patton to renew the offensive the moment weather and ground conditions permit. Chapter 4. The November Offensive. The breaking of the fortress November 8, 1944. The rain slackened at last, and the skies cleared enough for aircraft to fly. Patton struck with everything he had. The 20th Corps attacked on both sides of Metz, north of the city. The 95th Division forced a crossing of the swollen Moselle at Achange in assault boats under intense fire. South of the city, the veteran 90th Tough Ombres Division crossed near Königsmacher. Engineers worked heroically under shell fire to throw pontoon bridges across the river. Massive artillery preparation shook the earth for miles. Giant 240 millimeters howitzers and 8-inch guns fired round after round into the forts, while the 19th Tactical Air Command flew hundreds of sorties despite lingering low clouds. Once bridgeheads were secured, the Americans pushed eastward through flooded fields and shattered villages. The 6th Armored Division exploited breakthroughs, tanks churning through mud to cut supply lines behind the fortress ring. The Germans fought back with everything they had. Counterattacks came in wave after wave, often at night, shouting men emerging from the fog to clash in savage close combat. In the industrial suburb of Metz, house-to-house fighting raged for days, rooms cleared with grenades, cellars flushed with flamethrowers, snipers picking off anyone who showed himself at a window. Fort Jeanne d'Arc, the most modern and powerful in the entire ring, held out longest, its guns still firing accurately, until almost the end. By November 18th, American infantry entered the western outskirts of Metz proper. Street fighting erupted in the old city barricades of overturned vehicles and rubble. Booby-trapped doorways, snipers in church towers and attic windows. Civilians huddled in cellars as the battle swept over them. On November 22nd, Patton staged his triumphal entry. Jeeps rolled slowly down the main boulevard into the central square, past cheering French men and women who had hidden for years and now emerged waving tricolor flags. Patton stood in his vehicle, helmet gleaming, and addressed the assembled troops. Soldiers of the Third Army, your deeds in the Battle of Metz will fill pages of history for 1,000 years. The city itself was taken, but isolated forts continued to resist. Fort Driant, bypassed earlier, finally surrendered on December 8 after its garrison ran out of food and ammunition. Fort Jeanne d'Arc, the last holdout, capitulated on December 13. The cost had been steep. Third Army suffered more than 30,000 casualties in the Lorraine campaign, killed, wounded, missing, and non-battle losses from cold and disease. The Germans lost a similar number killed and wounded, plus thousands taken prisoner. But the road into the Saar industrial basin now lay open, and beyond it the Siegfried Line itself. Chapter 5. The quoteth news of Metz's fall reached London swiftly. In a late afternoon meeting of the War Cabinet, an aide handed Churchill the dispatch. The Prime Minister read it silently, then leaned back in his chair. A broad smile slowly creased his bulldog face. The room filled with generals, admirals, and senior ministers fell quiet, waiting. Churchill cleared his throat, voice deep and resonant with satisfaction. "Gentlemen," he began, "General Patton has done it. He has taken the city of Metz and broken Germany's so-called impregnable fortress ring." He paused, drawing on his cigar until the tip glowed bright red. "If Patton breaks Metz, he breaks the spine of the German army in the West." The words landed like a thunderclap. Several officers exchanged startled glances. This was blunt even for Churchill. Metz had stalled the Allied advance for crucial weeks, giving the Germans time to regroup and prepare their last great gamble in the Ardennes. Now that delay was over, Churchill continued, eyes alight, "This magnificent American warrior has cracked a nut that no invader has cracked. By direct assault in 15 centuries, the road to the Rhine now lies open before us. Mark my words, we shall soon be in Berlin." Later, in private letters and conversations, Churchill's praise for Patton grew even warmer. Though the two leaders never met face to face over the Metz campaign, the Prime Minister's admiration for the bold, aggressive American general reached new heights. When Eisenhower's staff passed Churchill's remark along to Patton, the general permitted himself a rare, broad grin. "Old Winnie knows a real fighter when he sees one," he said. Epilogue. Onward to victory with Metz behind them, Third Army surged eastward into the Saar. But in mid-December the Germans launched their desperate surprise offensive through the Ardennes, the Battle of the Bulge. Patton performed his most famous feat of the war. wheeling his army 90 degrees in winter weather to strike north and relieve the besieged town of Bastogne. The war ground on through a bitter winter and into the spring. Nazi Germany collapsed in May 1945. The fortress of Metz, once deemed impregnable, became a historical footnote, a testament to American determination, to the relentless drive of one extraordinary general, and to the truth of Winston Churchill's prophetic words. Patton had indeed broken the spine of the German army in the West, hastening the final victory.